Hey guys, welcome back. We're still talking theories of postmodernity, and in this one, we're going to deal with uh, a guy who had a lot of ideas about the sort of existential experience of postmodernity. His name is Zygmunt Bauman. And he's going to start from a pretty simple premise, which is that postmodernity, the postmodern world, is qualitatively different than the modern world in two respects. One in terms of complexity, and the second in terms of unpredictability. And then, based on that premise, which I'll illustrate for you in just a moment, he's going to talk about sort of three existential experiences within life in any period, but how they work in the postmodern period. The experience of creating an identity for yourself, the experience of how you are going to conduct yourself, how you are going to have sort of moral standards, and then the idea of how we group together in communities. So just having the terms identity, ethics, and communities up there kind of makes it look like we're picking three concepts sort of at random. But if you think about what I just talked about, your sense of yourself, your sense of how you act, and the way you group together with people, the three terms end up being kind of comprehensive in terms of the experience that a person has on a daily basis. Okay, so let's start with, and this is, I usually tend to go a little bit long in the first place, but Bauman's got a lot to say. I'm going to try to get through it as quickly as I can. So first of all, he says that the postmodern world is just complex and unpredictable in a way that the modern world never was. And there are going to be two reasons for that. First reason is that advances in science and technology have meant that the world as we understand it is constantly changing. There are new scientific insights, new technological developments constantly happening. And we get used to whatever the technology is, and you guys have grown up in such a stage of postmodernity that you're a little bit used to the idea that, yeah, we've got smartphones now, and eventually we're going to have the next thing, and then we'll just adjust to it. But that's a new experience for human beings. That experience of the world tomorrow is almost certainly going to be different than the world today is an experience that did not really exist until sometime during the Industrial Revolution. So from 300,000 years ago up into the 1800s, everybody thought that the way their life was going to be was basically the way their parents and their grandparents' life was. You guys don't have any illusions about that, but that's a unique experience in the scope of human history. So point one, developments in science and technology make the world increasingly complex and unpredictable. We don't know exactly what tomorrow is going to be like. The second way in which the postmodern world is qualitatively more complex and unpredictable than the modern world is that because of advances in communication technology and transportation technology in particular, we are connected to so many more different kinds of people that we have available to us many more ways of living our lives. And we're constantly, especially in the age of the internet, we're constantly becoming aware of more and more of them, which again means the options open to us are just not just more complex than what our ancestors had to deal with, but we know that we might discover something next week that makes us rethink the way we think about our lives today. So those two differences from the modern world, advances in science and technology, and our increasing connection with people, which means increasing exposure to different ways of life. Those two things add up together to making the postmodern world more complex and more unpredictable than any social context human beings have ever lived in. Think about that. We live in a context that's different than our species evolved in. And so Bauman says, all right, so the world, it's like living on an earthquake constantly. Everything is constantly changing, and that's not the way human beings evolved to be. So what are the consequences of it? So he's going to talk about three: identity, ethics, and communities. We'll start with identity. Sorry, and I'm going to pull down my script. He says, okay, so if the world is shaking under you, it means it's going to be hard to build a stable identity. He said, instead, we are constantly disassembling and reassembling our identities, or our ideas of who we are as people. He says that because of that, so that's the main point. We are constantly disassembling and reassembling our identities as the world, or at least our knowledge of the world, changes. Okay, that's kind of interesting to begin with. Most people over the course of human history knew who they were. They were born into a particular station in life. Things were not going to change, and so therefore their understanding of themselves was going to be consistent throughout the course of their life. This is not the case for you and me. He says that because of that reality, knowledge becomes super important in the process of identity assembly. And he talks about knowledge in two ways. First of all, people with more knowledge have a wider range of ways they can assemble an identity. I mean, which makes some sense, right? If I go to college and I learn and I take a religion course, for example, a survey of religion, and maybe I was born in America as a Christian, but I get exposed to Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism. All of a sudden there are more options, and because I have gained more knowledge, that I have more options for assembling a sense of myself, an identity based on those different religious beliefs. Okay, so first way knowledge is important is that a person with more knowledge can choose from a wider range of assembly patterns. Second, and related to that, so following up on that religion example, I go to college and I learn about those different religions from a professor of religion. What that means is that person, that professor of religion, has a tremendous amount of status in our society. More generally, experts of any kind have high status because you and I are looking to assemble our identities, and what we're doing is we're looking around and trying to find people who know about yoga, people who know about Buddhism, people who know about, I don't know, those are the first two things that came to my mind. But we're looking to get educated on these things, which means we turn to experts, which means experts have enhanced status in our society. They're, as compared to a society where an expert might have been valuable because they could, write a legal document for you. But you were going to basically live your life, like you might pay for that service, but you were going to live your life the way you lived your life. Now we are turning to these people to help us make sense of and create a sense of ourselves. All right. Finally, with regard to identity, God, we're almost at 9 minutes. Sorry. Finally, with regard to identity, he says in the process of assembling our identities, so sampling the panoply of options we're assembling, he says we impose regiments on ourselves. So we impose ways of being, ways of acting on ourselves. Things like, so I, in the 90s, maybe started doing Pilates, and then in the 2000s, I started doing CrossFit. And those are and I've done neither of those things. I don't know why those popped into my head. Those two things are regiments that I am imposing on myself as I assemble this identity. And, who knows what it will be next. But there might be something else. And in each of those cases, I don't know anything about that unless I read a book, take a class, whatever. unless I turn to experts. So he says, and he has this really, I think, interesting idea. He says, we're not coerced into doing these things. Nobody said, you better go start doing CrossFit or else. I am seduced into doing those things. Seduced by the promise of contentment. If I get this element of my life put together, then I will be happy. And that idea means that I am being seduced with promises of contentment when I assemble my identity in a certain way. But that seduction is coming from experts. It's a new kind of control that we haven't seen in the past. I mean, we're so used to it that, of course, but a farmer in the 19th century wasn't being seduced by experts in terms of how to organize his or her life. Like, you just lived your life as a farmer because that's what your father or mother did. Okay, that's it for identity. And I didn't want to do this, but I'm going to do it. I am going to pause us right there because that's 11 minutes in. Otherwise, we're going to end up over 20 for this video. So I will come back with part 2 of Zygmunt Bauman in the next video.